Good afternoon to our audience in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. Good morning to the Americas and good evening to the Asia-Pacific region. Welcome to our second session of Connecting Ports, the interactive talk show. We are very happy to be back together with you. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Christina Prieser, and in my daily job as economics expert and associate partner at HPC Hamburg Port Consulting, I support clients worldwide in increasing their competitiveness. Connecting Ports wants to be a talk show that interactively links ports, terminals, and the hinterland, and most importantly, looks at different perspectives of one focus topic. Our motto is debating what matters. Since you, in front of the screens around the world, are interested in spending your valuable time with us, you certainly have an opinion on today's topic. I'd like to encourage you to share your thoughts, questions, and ideas on our topic by using the chat at any time during the event. We want to get a better understanding of what you think about one of the central questions of today, namely our focus topic, energy transition. How is the port industry responding to hydrogen as the future solution? The call for ports and terminals, as well as also shipping lines, to master the change from fossil fuel to green alternatives is an obligation to which our industry has committed and which with different dynamics in implementation. What has the maritime industry achieved so far? Do we have the right technologies? Is hydrogen the way to net zero in ports? Is the energy transition coming in time to effectively achieve decarbonization goals? To take a deep dive into this matter, we are happy that we have four well-recognized guests with us today. So let me introduce our speakers. Prasanna Koluru, Director of Corporate Strategy at FPS, Future Proof Shipping from Rotterdam. She will strengthen the view on the topic from a ship operator's perspective. And she's a strong believer in close cooperation between shipping, ports, and authorities to speed up energy transition in the maritime industry. Thanks for joining us today. Michael Galvin, Director of Waterfront and Commercial Real Estate at the Port of Los Angeles in the US largest container port. He is also responsible for the energy infrastructure of the port, where he looks into all possibilities and tries to balance the views of the city of LA and the state of California. Pleasure to have you with us at such an early hour for you, Mike. Dr. Georg Böttner, Head of Executive Board Projects, New Business Development and Hydrogen Project at HHLA, Hamburg Hafen and Logistics AG. He will share his views and experience from on the topic from a terminal perspective. A very warm welcome, Georg. And last but not least, we welcome Helge Urban, Senior Business Development Manager and responsible for port-to-port projects at Hydrogenious LOHC Technologies. He will discuss with us which technologies can help to fuel the energy transition. It's great to have you here, Helge. Before we start talking with our guests, we have prepared a short video as an introduction. Mike, can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. So question is, why are ports a fundamental factor in driving energy transition forward? And how is the largest port in the United States positioning itself in terms of energy transition?
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I think ports, especially in California, are at the center point of where industry is, at the center point of where environmental regulation is, and really serve as the important first step in demand offtake to really accelerate energy transition, especially in the hydrogen area. We're doing our best at the Port of LA to look at all potential options that are out there. What we talk about in our Cleaner Action Plan that is in the third version that we've been working on since 2007 is to make sure that we are agnostic technology-wise and really looking at every opportunity that's out there. But hydrogen specifically provides a very reliable pathway that is extremely important for what we want to see, which is for the ports to remain resilient going forward, for the transition to work for industry and for labor, and for us to have a reliable stream of energy coming into the future that we can depend on as we move towards a zero carbon port.
Thank you very much. You mentioned hydrogen. Since ports are at the center of early hydrogen adoption due to their key role as the epicenter of large-scale transport operations, does the Port of Los Angeles take over a major role in hydrogen too?
We do. We've been very active in the marketplace, especially in the last year as different funding opportunities have come up for our terminals. First of all, we've created deadlines through our Cleaner Action Plan for our terminals to be zero emissions by 2030 and all drayage trucks to be zero emissions by 2035. So we've put that out there as regulation that we're working towards, or a policy that we're working towards with our terminals, but we don't just leave it at that. We continue to facilitate discussions and continue to move the needle so that there are opportunities there to make sure that we all collectively meet those goals. And hydrogen is a big piece of that, important because of the opportunities it provides that battery electric don't provide, with the resiliency in regards to the duty cycle, being able to operate very similarly to what we see today in the diesel operations. And so what we want to do is allow that to continue by opening up that pathway, continuing to open up discussions. What we see most importantly in the market is a lack of confidence, and that comes from a lack of communication. So what we've done is try to bring as many people to the table as possible to continue the discussion so that the demand and the supply side understand exactly what's happening. And there is more security in moving forward with business risk, knowing that the port is pushing our tenants and industry around us to move towards a zero carbon environment. Supply can come in behind that and really chase the demand. So we're trying to get as many people in the conversation as possible so that the market will take those risks and get us to where we need in 2030 and 2035 to meet our zero emissions goals.
Thanks you very much, Mark. That's a very extensive and varied activities in Los Angeles. And I think it's a very important aspect to include all the stakeholders. So, Georg, what is the situation like in the largest terminal of Germany in operating?
You know, it's kind of similar here in Hamburg, at least. Our emission goals are not as ambitious as the one in Los Angeles, but we have kind of a similar approach. First of all, we try to cooperate with as many players, and the Port of LA is one of the players, for instance, because it is important to share knowledge and to release uncertainty in this upcoming market and this upcoming environment. And secondly, you know, it is important to start now and not wait, because in order to achieve these climate goals, you know, whether it be like being climate neutral in 2030 or being just cutting your emissions by 50, 60, whatever percent, if you don't start now, you just miss out on the time in order to achieve these goals. That's what we've done in the last couple of years. We started with a cluster in order to make the first steps and gain or create the knowledge we need in order to make space for a carbon neutral future.
Great. So you mentioned it, HHLA wants to be climate neutral by 2040 and is pushing for energy transition. And what are key critical components of the strategy? Can you briefly sum up?
As I said, you just need to start, make the first steps and cooperate within a network of participants. And that's exactly what we have done. There's like the first two steps, and there's a third component of our strategy in regard to the transition towards carbon neutral future. We are positioning ourselves as a service provider for the import and distribution of hydrogen in Europe and in Hamburg in order to supply large energy off-takers with the required energy.
And why did HHLA decide to favor hydrogen? And can you describe why it shall be used at the terminals?
We didn't decide to favor hydrogen or because we don't favor hydrogen or we are not favoring battery electric solutions. In our opinion, there is a good use case and a good for every single solution. So hydrogen will play its role in any use case where you have a high energy demand, long running hours, where you need to have a secure supply, molecule-based, where you can store your energy carrier. And there will be other use cases, low running hours, low energy demand, where battery electric solutions are the better ones. And we are now starting to, work on the decisive lines between one solution and the other in order to make smart investments.
So what's the state of implementation also with regard to equipment? Are you still testing or are you already in a running mode?
In terms of battery electric, we are already in a running mode. So we already switched almost all of our fleet, which is suitable for pure electric or battery electric solutions. In terms of hydrogen, we are still in a testing mode for similar or a number of reasons. First of all, the equipment we are using, is still in a prototype phase. So, and if we want to switch, we have to be sure that it is not only working, but it's working reliably and it's working on a 24/7 mode, because we have to be sure that we can serve the communities with our services, because that's important for our industry.
All right, thank you very much, Georg. Quickly jumping in here, I wonder what our viewers say, so please, you're very welcome to use the chat and write your questions, ideas or comments in there. We will take questions during the event and pass them on to our speakers. Now, we heard that the ports and terminals are very active in this energy transition regard. Let's switch over to the water side. To Prasanna. Future-proof shipping is an operator of inland vessels sailing on European inland waterways. And your credo is, I quote, to prove that zero-emission shipping is not only possible, but also achievable at a responsible cost that is unaffordable for our planet. So how's that feasible in practice?
Well, we are in Future-Proof Shipping currently owns 3 inland vessels, and we're looking to grow our fleet to over 25 vessels by 2030. The first vessel is actually the one you see in my background here. She's currently in the shipyard getting retrofitted to run on hydrogen and PEM fuel cells. So during the retrofit, we're taking out the combustion engine, putting in an electric drivetrain, PEM fuel cells, a battery pack, and hydrogen storage containers. How is it feasible? It is feasible, and it is feasible now with technology that's available today, because we expect this vessel to be sailing in full commercial operations in the first quarter of 23. And in terms of the cost, I think it's important to look at the cost that zero-emission shipping adds in terms of the cost of a product. So we've done the math for shipping a piece of like a loaf of bread, a t-shirt, a pair of sneakers, a wine bottle, etc., with without emissions between Rotterdam and Germany, Rotterdam and Belgium, and the amount it adds is in the order of 1 to 6 euro cents. And if somebody added that to a product in the grocery store or when you went shopping, you would barely notice. And I think it is important to look at price and cost in that context. And in terms of, is it feasible financially, we're able to do this because at this moment we have access to some European and Dutch subsidies. We have an investor who is very keen on looking at the costs to the planet as well as what it's costing us to do this. And it's patient capital, so we're able to bring several creative financial solutions to make this happen. But as technology scales and implementation scales, not only on vessels, but across ports and port equipment, the costs of fuel cells and hydrogen will come down. And we expect this to be financially feasible in a very traditional business case very soon.
And have you investigated in advance which technologies have the best carbon footprint? Hydrogen, battery, or other upcoming technologies, and when new building or retrofitting a vessel?
Future-proof shipping is technology and fuel agnostic. Our goal is zero emissions. And for that, for every single vessel that we put into the water, we investigate all possible solutions. So we've looked into batteries, we've looked into hydrogen and PEM fuel cells, we've looked into technologies that are still developing in terms of solid oxide fuel cells, ammonia, methanol, etc., to understand their financial feasibility as well as life cycle emissions. And what we've learned, you will actually see a white paper on the website of Future-Proof Shipping where there is an analysis from our engineering team on the different technologies. But we've learned that by far the biggest impact of a fuel or a technology is the operational phase and not the production phase. By that I mean including production of the diesel engine, production of the PEM fuel cells, production of solid oxide fuel cells. That is the smaller part of the equation, and the bigger part of the equation is how this fuel is used on board. And for all the options that we considered, PEM fuel cells and green hydrogen offered the lowest possible environmental impact compared to the different solutions. And if you went with gray hydrogen, again, that would look completely different. So it's important to focus also on where the fuel itself is coming from.
Yes, yeah. So you are operating in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany at the moment. How is the bunkering infrastructure along these trade routes? And if I may, there is a question from the audience. I just add that because I think that goes in the same direction. So since the future of the fuel is unknown, how much of a challenge does that pose to ship owners and ship managers, and how to deal with these challenges? Do you have any experience with that?
I will take the infrastructure question first. Infrastructure at this moment is practically non-existent. It's developing, but then it's also important to look beyond what we expect traditionally as this is what infrastructure should look like. When we started planning the retrofit of our vessel, we said, okay, let's look at how we can refuel this vessel and put 1 ton of hydrogen on board at Rotterdam or somewhere in Belgium. And then we have a container vessel, so we have slots to keep, and we cannot wait at a port and do the refueling with the refueling technology that was available 2.5 years ago when we started looking into the refueling. But now technology has already progressed, so you can refuel about 500 kilos of hydrogen in 30 minutes. But we said, okay, even if technology were available, you have to solve a regulatory challenge. What is the simplest way to make this happen without having to complicate and redefine the entire operation? So what we're doing is we have a container swap solution. So we have two 40-foot containers of hydrogen on board. When they get empty, which would be either when we reach Rotterdam or Antwerp, we take the empty containers off and we put full containers back on board. So we have a spare set of containers that are being filled at the refueling location of Air Liquide, who is the supplier of green hydrogen for this particular vessel. So I think it's important to think about the entire operation, what part of the operation can be changed and what cannot. So what are negotiables and non-negotiables, and bring together, in echoing the sentiments of the other speakers, that bring together the chain to make it happen, look at it collaboratively to problem solve and find a solution. With respect to there's uncertainty, there is uncertainty always, right? We don't stop buying phones today because there will be a new phone tomorrow. So it's really about finding what you can implement today and what actions you can take to ensure that your fleet is secure for the future. So if you cannot make a choice of one particular technology today, you don't necessarily have to transform your own whole vessel. You can try out hydrogen, or you can try out batteries on auxiliary power systems, because it's going to take us time to learn about these technologies and implement them effectively on a fleet-wide scale. So it's about taking action, and it's about making the steps and being flexible and looking at the picture holistically and not at each individual problem in its silo.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can you think of any further idea of how ports can better support a smooth handling of hydrogen vessels?
I think one of the things we've learned over the past couple of years is that when we go to ports and we say, hey, we might want to swap hydrogen containers here, or we want to think about refueling our vessel here, we essentially start off from a blank slate. So if ports can think about what would be required for vessel owners to be able to refuel, whether it be hydrogen or have access to shore power or methanol or ammonia, what have you, if you can come up with a checklist, kind of like already exists for LNG or other fuels in the past, and say, hey, if a ship owner wants to refuel here, this is kind of the people they need to contact. This is the authorities you need to talk to. These are the permissions you need to have. That itself will go a long way in making things easy for people. A lot of the ship owners we talk to just don't even want to dip their toe into this because it sounds and feels so complex. So taking away those barriers, and like we also heard speakers before me say, communication is important, but then also showing that there is a thought process within ports already, and that knowledge can be tapped into by people who are stepping in and trying to put vessels into the water will go a great way in making this faster.
Great. I would also like to give Mike the chance to respond on what Prasanna said. So how is the Port of Los Angeles prepared to serve alternative fuel vessels?
It's just as you said, we're in the infancy stages of being able to do that. We really skipped past LNG and looking at that as an alternative fuel, and now we're looking at something else altogether. But a lot of those lessons that we have learned with our brief introduction to LNG can be applied to hydrogen as well. But I think it's communication, it's things we're doing. I think we'll talk a little bit more about this on the Green Shipping Corridor to get everybody in the same room, including the shipping lines, the fuel logistics providers, the Port Authority, and the terminals to figure out how all these pieces are going to work. At this point, it's a little bit difficult because you have different variations of fuel that are being looked at by ship owners as well, which I think the most important thing is to be able to coalesce around one fuel type. And that way the market will act like it does today to a certain degree, but there's so many technologies out there that we understand right now it's a market in flux. And so, but we have to keep the communication open and be able to respond once all those pieces start coming together, and they will in the near future.
Perfect. That's good to hear. And now let's point out another important aspect of the transportation of hydrogen. So hydrogen is a gas that is challenging to handle. Hydrogenious has found a way to transport hydrogen as oil in tankers. Helge, can you explain the principle of liquid organic hydrogen carriers?
Yes, for sure. Thanks for the question. So, how does it work? We have, for example, green hydrogen production coming from photovoltaics, wind energy. So, talking about clean hydrogen production here. And then we have invented a process storing hydrogen in so-called LOHC oil, liquid organic hydrogen carrier oil. It is a benzyl toluene thermal oil, and within the storage process, we basically make hydrogen transportable. We take the dangerous characteristics from the hydrogen, and we go to with this LOHC oil that's loaded with hydrogen to, for example, to a vessel. The vessel is loaded now and can transport the loaded LOHC oil to a discharge place. In the particular case, can be a port, of course, where we have the discharge process, the dehydrogenation process, and then we split hydrogen from the oil. The hydrogen goes to the off-taker. In that case, can be a steel industry, and the ship goes back to the beginning, but with the oil not loaded with hydrogen anymore. And this is a cycle in this picture, and you can run these cycles 300 times, and we are already working on 100 more times. For example, 700 times up to 1,000 times.
So it seems that liquid organic hydrogen carriers technologies offer a great potential for the safe transport and storage of hydrogen by making use of the existing infrastructure. So what does such a large-scale import facility look like in the near future?
So we are already working on different transport routes, and we are looking for a large-scale hydrogen infrastructure, of course. That consists of one electrolyzer, talking about wind energy electrolyzers and coming green hydrogen from photovoltaics. Can be in the MENA region, Scandinavian countries can be the source of the hydrogen. And then we transport it via ship to discharge ports like Hamburg, of course, but also we are working closely with the port of Amsterdam at the moment. But any port in Europe can be a future hydrogen hub, and we are working on several projects already and making hydrogen more available, as the hydrogen, our solution makes hydrogen in that way more attractive, because we can use the existing infrastructure and makes it more flexible, transporting hydrogen to even the hinterland and decentralized locations, not just the centralized locations. And as this is a huge benefit, we can definitely deliver the alternative to ammonia, as ammonia transportation on roads is not allowed.
You're having an ambitious plan there, so to establish a large-scale port-to-port infrastructure for liquid organic hydrogen carriers. You mentioned Amsterdam. Do you also have other reference projects, and can you give us a first outlook on your roadmap?
Yeah, of course. So the first project we have up and running is the Hector project. We are having a time scope in mind for 2025, where we have the first big large-scale storage unit or storage plant available at Covestro's Chem Park in Dormagen. And linked to that project, we have, within this project, we have a release unit in Rotterdam, also up and running in 2025. In 2026, under the IPCEI project, Northern Green Crane, we have a storage unit in Sweden, and then transportation via ship to Rotterdam and further distribution to Lingen, River Ems.
Are you also planning to use LOHC releases on board of hydrogen vessels? And do you have already initial collaborations?
Yes, we have. We are planning to install our release unit, so splitting the hydrogen from the LOHC oil on board of a vessel. We have a service offshore vessel for this particular application, and we are working closely with the Ascensieux Reederei, a shipyard company from Norway, and the ship is already in commission. And we will install our release unit there so that ships are able to use loaded LOHC while being commissioned on ocean.
Prasanna, would that be an option for you too?
It depends on the size of the release unit and whether or not, and the rate of release, because the vessels that we have right now are about 110 meters and 135 meters. So they fit something between 200 containers to 400 containers, depending on the width. So if this release unit were to take up a lot of space, and if it takes up cargo space, there is a certain point where the amount of cargo space lost and the amount of CAPEX and OPEX will need to balance out to make sense. So for each vessel and each particular route, the amount of hydrogen required is different. Hence, the amount of LOHC required would be different. So it is, unfortunately, there's no blanket answer to this. I have to say it depends. But it is an interesting technology. And we, like I said earlier, we've analyzed several possibilities, and LOHC was one of them. When we did the analysis for this particular vessel, LOHC was not available in our part or where we were operating. But I hear from the conversation now that it is, so we should look at it more closely in the future.
That's great to hear. So connection well made according to our topic. There is a question from the audience for Helge, asking whether there are already any projects which ports in developing countries, and are you considering that?
Very good question. Thank you. Yes, we are considering first projects, pilot projects in development countries, and therefore looking for regions, remote regions, especially as we see hydrogen or LOHC technology and hydrogen sees our technology as the missing link between very remote geographies with access to green hydrogen or cheap hydrogen then in production, and very populated areas. And therefore we have been on delegation trips already, or trade delegation trips already, having the first synergy discussions in these countries.
That's good to hear. So as you know, HPC is very active in developing countries, so it's definitely something to dwell on also in the future. Besides LOHC, there are other technologies for transporting hydrogen, such as liquid hydrogen, compressed hydrogen, methanol, and ammonia. However, all the handling is not risk-free. In September, a first ammonia test shipment from Abu Dhabi was successfully transported to Hamburg on a Hapag-Lloyd vessel, and the cargo was handled at container terminal Altenwerder. So, Georg, what was the experience?
You know, overall, it was a really good experience because what we did is we used existing infrastructure for the first energy imports of ammonia-based energy imports. And the message we wanted to set out there is, you know, that a lot of the infrastructure which we need in order to start with switching towards renewable fuels is already in place. It's not only container infrastructure, but there are also terminals for importing ammonia in a large scale. So even though we still need to build a lot of infrastructure, you know, there's enough there to start the process. And I guess we should, you know, use this time, and that was the main message, use the time we have in order to, and use what you already have in order to speed up the process. And that's what we did. We imported ammonia, we supplied it to a large industrial off-taker who used it to replace natural gas. And overall, it was a good experience. And apart from that, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about our processes, of what we should work on, what our permissions needs to be, and so on. So again, close cooperation between all stakeholders within such a process, from the authoritative bodies to the supplier, off-taker, and logistic service supplier, gave a really good experience.
And from your point of view, which transport technology has the most potential to gain ground?
I have to reiterate what was already said in this meeting, because there is no single answer to this question. I'm really convinced that a lot of import carriers will play their role, being it LOHC, being it ammonia, for instance, where you can use it as ammonia. There's no way around ammonia, and also liquefied hydrogen has a great potential where you using or are going to use this hydrogen in a liquefied form. So what we have to bear in mind that the future will look more diverse as it is today. So we have to be prepared for a lot of different forms of energy import. It will be not just natural gas or crude oil as it is today. It will be different.
Mike, what's your view on that?
The same, generally, that we have to be open. We all live in different environments too. So what works in certain parts of the world in regards to how things are handled and how communities accept handling of different types of energy commodities is varied. So we need to be sensitive to that and looking at these different opportunities and understanding what works in different ports. So I think it is critical to keep an open mind, but also to keep your finger on where your local communities are and where the opportunities are, depending on how your port is situated with those communities and what is going to work best. But finding other solutions. Just because it doesn't work to handle certain commodities in your port doesn't mean you can't find a way to handle that commodity close by to your port. And so that's just looking at different ways to do bunkering than you've really thought about currently. And so I think that's the most important thing. Keep an open mind and find solutions no matter what the commodity you're trying to establish is.
Great, that's a good one. We already briefly touched the issue of collaboration and stakeholder engagement. So the development, as you just mentioned, of a maritime hydrogen supply chain seems to succeed only with intensive cooperation of many players involved in across the chain. And so, Mike, the Port of Los Angeles is an active member of the Southern California Hydrogen Cluster. Can you tell us a bit more about its purpose and how it will help to develop a hydrogen infrastructure covering production, distribution, and the use of it in the port?
Sure. Yeah, the cluster was formed initially really just to create an open-ended forum for people to discuss what is going on in the hydrogen markets and to really relieve some of the consternation about moving forward and making sure that industry understands that there will be solutions. If you're on the demand side, there will be solutions coming on the supply side. And if you're on the supply side, that there will be a market to meet. And so that was the initial intent, to open up communication, to develop the marketplace, to make it clear to the suppliers what type of demand was available or potential demand, what was out there, both at the ports and in the industrial sector around the ports and in power generation, all centered around the ports. So a really big opportunity to scale up potential supply, gathering projects. What was important as well to figure out all the potential projects that are out there that may not fit into certain funding buckets, but then to find the right funding bucket for that. So really, in opening up the conversation, we're able to dispel a lot of the lack of confidence that we see, because what we're really focused on at the port is making sure that our customers, our terminal operators and shipping lines in the future have the fuel available when it's necessary to transition to zero emissions. And that's one of the biggest issues from the terminal operators. Like, okay, well, the equipment, we're still testing it. We need more of it. So that's one thing. Let's figure out a way to get more funding for more equipment so that we can get confidence in the equipment from both the operators who are going to invest in it and the unions and labor that are going to use it. Secondarily, where is it coming from? Where is the supply going to come from? Is it still going to be the industrial gas companies supplying it, or is it going to be a larger market? So the cluster allows that conversation to open up quite a bit by looking at how do we build in large scale storage to this marketplace? How do we build in large scale distribution? And then how do we get there? Because all of those things take a long time to build out. That those large pieces of infrastructure could take 10 to 15 years to build, but how do we bridge the gap in between now and then? And then pricing, is pricing going to be at a place that's competitive? That has been helped a lot by the price of crude oil derivatives and especially diesel, given us an opportunity where we were initially shooting for $1 to $2 a kilogram. Now we're seeing, if you're in the $3 a kilogram to $4 a kilogram range, maybe that's going to be really competitive in pushing you forward economically. And I think that's the critical component to what we're all trying to do, is through all this communication, through all this collaboration, get to a point where economics drive the marketplace. Technology will catch up to that, but if the economics drive the marketplace, everything will push forward to a zero carbon environment. So those are the key components of the cluster, and the intent is really generally to create confidence in the marketplace on both the supply and demand side so that investment will be made.
Thanks, Mike. Also, HHLA has founded the Clean Ports and Logistics Cluster to investigate how hydrogen can be reliably used to supply port technology and logistics. Georg, can you tell us a bit more about the composition of the partners and the scope? Is there other similarities to what Mike just said?
There are some similarities. The Clean Port and Logistics Cluster is concerned about the decarbonization of port operation and heavy-duty logistics. And if you talk about this question, there are a lot of questions arising, starting from the equipment which needs to be there and which needs to be reliable, talking about the supply of hydrogen, talking about the infrastructure you need in order to distribute the hydrogen, talking about hydrogen production in a small scale, in larger scales, the fuel economy. And what we logistics clusters connected different dots in ports, manufacturers of equipment, suppliers of hydrogen, scientific partners, in order to speed up the process and start using it.
Okay. You were a bit interrupted, but I take that there is a lot going on and a lot of engagement taking place. So you can say it's happening on both sides of the big pond, right? Great. Lynn Lowe, CEO of Global Center for Maritime Decarbonation, said in her keynote session during the Talk Asia, "You cannot decarbonize the maritime sector without taking into account the land-based infrastructure." So how are the Port of Los Angeles and HHLA positioning themselves when it comes to transporting hydrogen to the hinterland? Mike, would you like to start?
Sure, and it's it's a reverse situation to some degree depending on where you're starting, right? So in California, our expectation is that we will be producing a large component of our hydrogen needs here locally, and so we're figuring out a way, how do we get that supply that's being produced by renewables that may be coming out of the Central Valley, but most likely will be coming from solar and wind out in our desert that is directly east of us, and aligning with where the storage is, which is not something you can build, but something that exists in geological formations, with the marketplace coming in. So that goes back to the discussion about the cluster and making sure that all the pieces are coming together in time when they need to. But the expectation is that it'll be different over time. Initially, you're going to start with what's happening right now, which is small scale production plants starting up, fed by solar and wind in the desert, that are producing 10,000 to 20,000 metric tons annually. And that's feeding the market in the 2030 to 2035 range, while we're continuing to build out the infrastructure with large scale storage and large scale distribution by pipeline into the region. So it's a multiple step approach to make sure that as we build up, that there is reliable supply throughout. And there will probably be an international component coming in at some point, because I think what we all understand is we need as much hydrogen as we can get our hands on in the future years, because of the reliability and the flexibility of the fuel in all these different areas, from industrials to cement production to power generation to the ports and transportation, the shipping industry. There's so many opportunities there. So we have to be open to all the different variables, but we have to plan that really well to make sure that we have answers along the line for how we're going to get high scale production and distribution into the region in that 12 to 15 year time frame when we really need it. But conversations are ongoing, and we have a lot of solutions, just need to implement.
And Georg, would you like to join in?
I will at least make an attempt, and I hope that you can hear me better now. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, we need to position ourselves. For Hamburg, it will be more like an import-based solution, because we are in a different situation than the port of LA. We need more imports. So for us, it's more important to start building the infrastructure for the import, but equally important to have the hydrogen grid in place for a safe and reliable distribution to this effect. So yes, infrastructure is key for everything. But again, you know, for what we need in order to start the process, that is to some extent already in place, and we should use it in order not to wait for the infrastructure and afterwards get problems with our time frame.
Thank you. Helge, Hydrogenious also supplies filling stations and hence the hinterland with LOHC technology. What is the advantage over conventional hydrogen filling stations?
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, we can also, we are able to transport hydrogen via LOHC technology to decentralized locations. Therefore, we are able to use trucks or rail or trains and railways for transporting hydrogen over longer distances to, for example, from northern Germany to South Germany, and therefore making it available in these stations. So we are also having in mind, of course, the hinterland connections, being able to supply those locations, and also considering domestic shipping in the future. And therefore, filling stations are, of course, part of the complete infrastructure in the future. And as I mentioned, the advantage of being flexible and being safe in transportation, no toxicity, and of course, hardly flammability of the carrier that we use for transporting hydrogen.
Thank you, Helge. Now there is one question from Mike from the audience. How far is the regulatory side in the United States when it comes to transport and handling of hydrogen and or its derivatives?
It's a growing marketplace, and that is not quite there yet. But as part of these discussions that are going on both in the Southern California cluster, statewide in California, as we pursue significant funding that is being made available on the federal level, that is a very large piece of the discussion and very large piece of potential funding opportunities, making sure that on the federal level and on the state level, the regulations in regards to how different forms of hydrogen are going to be handled are in place to allow that to happen. And we've seen that already in trying to just get equipment and fueling, mobile fueling going on our terminals. that the fire department hasn't seen it before, so they want it to be done in a specific way, the same way that they see diesel, but the gas that we're using is obviously acting different than diesel, and so it doesn't actually make sense sometimes, but that's because we just haven't seen it. So we have to continue to work through that on a local level and all the way up to the state and federal level as well. But it is a conversation that is ongoing at this time, and has clearly been at the forefront, understanding that that could be a big issue in the future. In California specifically, we have a lot of experience. We've been working towards getting a passenger car market up for the last 16 to 17 years. And so there are a lot of lessons learned there in what we've done there to get that fueling infrastructure up and running. And we can then apply the regulatory environment there to heavy duty fueling, as well as on the marine side and amongst our terminals, and handling it in various sectors that don't currently use it today.
Thanks, Mike. Just a quick one to Prasanna and Georg. Very quick one. Do you have other experiences regarding the regulatory framework conditions?
Well, for vessels, there isn't draft regulation yet to use hydrogen as a fuel on board. So for the MAS, as well as the second vessel, which will be converted next year, we've gone through a risk-based design process along with Lloyd's Register. So we essentially then go from there to Central Commission of Navigation on the Rhine, which is the regulatory body from who we have to get permission to be able to sail. And essentially what we try to prove through this risk-based process is that the design that we propose with hydrogen and PEM fuel cells is as safe as a diesel vessel. And I think through the process, class has learned a lot as well. And we've heard that the CCNR will put forth some regulations for hydrogen and fuel cells somewhere early next year. So I think from there, it's there are also some draft guidelines from DNV and a couple of other class societies as well for fuel cells already. I think they're also in development as more and more projects are coming online. But then it's also important to put more projects on the line to be able to get feedback from regulations, because you can't have a checklist if you don't know whether the checklist is right or not. Then go back to my previous point of we have to put the technologies on the water and take action and try things out, even if it's at a small scale.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Georg? Otherwise, we can proceed.
I would add, if you want to, or if you ask for a checklist, keep them rather short at the beginning. It will develop over the time, and so be prepared, be courageous, not to over-regulate and starting market and starting applications. In Hamburg, I can say we have a lot of support from the administration and local government, so that is moving quite well. If I look to the European level, I sometimes get afraid of the amounts of regulation which are showing up on the horizon. So, but not more to add from my side.
Thank you very much, Georg. And that leads us to our final statements directly. So I would like to ask each of our guests to give us quick final thoughts, 1 minute each, on what are your lessons learned from the first steps towards the establishment of hydrogen structures in the port industry. So Prasanna, Helge, Mike, and Georg.
So one of our biggest learnings at Future-Proof Shipping is that we can do any number of feasibility studies, but that is not going to prepare us for the real thing. So start doing the real thing as soon as possible.
Okay.
Helge?
I would like to come back what Georg mentioned in the beginning. Start networking and start building collaborations and doing or form partnerships. And you cannot run alone, especially when we talk about this hydrogen marathon. And you really need to create a knowledge about what the future market and the technology to transport it, for example. And therefore, especially for Hydrogenius, it was very important to reach out to all, let's say, participants in the complete end-to-end supply chain, not just talking about the hydrogen producers. No, we need to also consider the terminal companies, the ports, of course, export port, import ports, and also the shipping companies, yes. And but in the end, there is the off-taker, and the off-takers need to somehow explain what is the hydrogen in the future, what is the decarbonization targets they have in the future, and every project starts with a small discussion, a synergy discussion, and every project needs a strong team, a strong partnership, and coming to one table. And I know many cooks are creating a bad meal, but in that case, we need to understand from each other what are the interests of each party here. And therefore, networking is the key, and being open for ideas, and stop talking and just do it then.
Thank you. Mike?
I echo those sentiments. Getting as many people in the room as possible, even though it can be inefficient at some point. It's important to get information out there and encourage a discussion among all the different nodes of the supply chain. We're not doing something that is simple. The oil and gas industry took 150 years to get to the point that we're at today, to get to the level of resiliency, and sometimes we take that for granted. We need to create a hydrogen market that is as resilient so it doesn't fail as a result of it being unreliable. And we've seen that in California with the passenger car market. And so we can learn from those lessons, but we can only learn by continuing to talk to all of those that are participatory here, all the way through the supply chain, from the supply all the way down to the end user. And I think with that, we will continue to build the best mousetrap we can to really resolve the planet's needs in getting to a zero carbon port and larger transportation network.
Thanks. And Georg?
Yeah, I largely can repeat, only the real things matters. So only lessons learned from a real thing are real lessons learned. That was would be my first point. The second point is cooperate. The task is far too large and the time frame is far too tight for any single country, any single region, any single company to do it alone. So we need to share experience, we need to share knowledge in order to speed up the process. And what I would like to add is view of our regulators. Be sure the regulation of 250 will be far different from the regulation of 2023. But what matters now is the regulation of 2023, and that needs to be a regulation who speed up the process and not one who make it slow and not moving.
Thank you very much, Georg. And quoting the economists, the World Ahead 2023, I would conclude that the coming year is a make or break year for hydrogen, and that the governments, regulators, and the industry around the world, and especially in Europe, need to speed up to make things happen. So thank you to all of you for your valuable input. We appreciate very much that you were available as our guests today. And also thank you very much to our audience that you stayed with us despite the technical problems in the beginning. If we have not answered any questions you may have, please send us an email to marketing@hpchamburg.de. We keep up the contact with our speakers and we will try to answer all your questions. This session has been recorded and will be made available shortly via our website, hamburgportconsulting.com, together with some material our speakers like to share with you. Our next session of Connecting Ports will continue debating what matters, focusing on terminal automation. Where do we stand? Where do we go? So please join us again on the 7th of March. Thanks again for being with us and staying with us, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Big thanks to the team of Hamburg, Port of Hamburg Marketing, who provided the facilities and the technical support. Bye-bye, tschüss from Hamburg. The whole Connecting Ports team wishes you Merry Christmas, great festivity season, and all the best for the new year. See you soon.